never thought I'd be scared of a knock-knock joke, that's for sure. But after listening to this story last night, I had to go to the restroom, and the whole time I'm in the restroom, I'm like, no one better knock on my door right now. No one better knock on my door. So the guy gets woken up by his girlfriend saying, knock, knock. He looks at the time, and it is 3:27 in the morning, and he is so confused. So he's like, what are you doing? Why are you waking me up saying knock, knock? And her response to all of that is, knock, knock. And he's like, what the fuck? Like, we're asleep. Why are you waking me up trying to get me to play this little game with you by saying knock, knock? And his girlfriend's like, just answer me. And she goes, knock, knock. And he's like giving up. So he's like, fine, who's there? And she says, it's not me, don't open the door. Turns around and goes back to sleep, and he stays there like, what the fuck? So he ends up going to bed still, and the following morning he wanted to ask her why she did that, and it almost seemed like she was trying to ignore his question, but she ends up telling him, oh, it's just a little prank that I thought of, and like she leaves to work. Like she was trying everything to avoid the question for whatever reason. So they both go to work, they have dinner, and they go to bed, and again he gets woken up by her saying, knock, knock. He looks at the clock and it's 3:27 in the morning, and he looks at her and says, you already told me this was a prank. Why are you doing this again? Let's just go back to sleep. And the only thing she responds to him with is, knock, knock. So he's irritated and he's like, what is the point of this? What are you doing? Like, just tell me what's the end game. All she says is, just answer, knock, knock. And he's like, fine, who's there? And she goes, it's not me, don't open the door. She turns around and goes back to bed. So at this point, the boyfriend is angry because he's like, why is she waking us up over a stupid prank or joke or a game when we both have to work the next day? So that morning when they woke up to go to work, he was like, you need to tell me why you're doing this. And she wasn't going to leave the door like she did the first night, not really giving him a real answer. So he's like, you need to tell me why. What's the end game? What are you doing? However, she gives him the same answer. It's just a game. It's just a game. Like, and he's like, why? And she's like, it's a game. And she just like leaves the house. So as you can imagine, they come home, have dinner, go to sleep, and again she wakes him up at 3:27 in the morning, but this time he's not answering. He's like, why are you doing this? What is the end game? And she goes, just answer, knock, knock, just answer. And he's like, no. And she's like, answer, knock, knock, answer. And he's like, I'm not answering. Why are you doing this? So he's like, you know, you're causing a problem in our relationship. This isn't a joke anymore. You're waking me up in the middle of the night when we both have to go to work. So no, I don't want to play your game. Why are you doing this? You're like creating issues in our relationship. And she's still like, answer, please, answer, knock, knock. So he ends up saying, who the fuck is it? Like, who the fuck is at that door? And she goes, it's not me, don't open the door. She turns around and goes to sleep. So morning comes around and he wants to have a serious conversation with her. So he tells her, I don't know how or what kind of conversation I need to have with you to let you know that it's really messed up that you keep waking us up in the middle of the night and it's creating a big problem. And this time she was like apologetic. She's like, I'm sorry. I don't mean to do it. I just thought it was a game. He's angry with that answer because it makes no fucking sense where you keep doing this to him. You know what I mean? So he storms out. He goes to work and all day she's sending him text messages like, I'm sorry, and she's calling him, he's not answering. He's ignoring everything. He mentions that the last text that she sends him is like, I'm so sorry, I know that sleep is important, I promise this is not gonna happen again, please forgive me. But the boyfriend kind of starts feeling bad because they had never argued like this before, so for him to ignore her calls or texts made him feel a little bit guilty. So he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna forgive her and I'm gonna make her dinner because I don't want this to be like the end of us. So he goes home, he makes her dinner, they eat together, and they go to bed. This time he gets woken up again with a knock knock. He glances at the clock and it's 3:27 in the morning, and he says that he wants to get up and just scream at the top of his lungs. Like he wants to grab everything in that room and just fucking break it apart. So he says that he turns to look at his girlfriend that's probably next to him, like say knock knock, but instead she's standing on the bed looking down at him with the craziest smile saying knock knock. The way he describes this smile, I don't know if you guys ever seen that movie, oh my god, the movie Smile, okay, where it's like extended and it looks freaky. He's like, the smile was very off-putting. It was not like her normal smile. So as he's looking up at her with that weird fucking smile, he says, what are you doing? And in between that smiley face, she's telling him, knock knock. Oh my god, I got chills. At that moment, after she says knock knock again with her weird ass fucking smile, he says that her body started cracking and bending, and it was like a scene from a scary movie, and it scared him so much that he jumps out of bed and runs to the kitchen. But once he gets to the kitchen to catch a breath, he hears a knock at the front door. When he hears the knock, his first instinct is like, who is it? And it's his girlfriend's voice saying, love, please open the door. Whatever is in there is not me. Open the door, please. Whatever is in there is not me. Open the door, please. Please open the door. Don't listen to the person that's in there. Open the door. He has no idea what to do because he's like, who's the real one in the bedroom, outside the door? But in that moment, he had no time to do anything because whoever was in the bedroom, his girlfriend, comes out with that creepy smile, running full force towards him. But by the time she's about to get to him, he faints, passes out because of how scared he was. He says that he wakes up 2 hours later and his girlfriend is nowhere in that home. He says that he hasn't seen her since. He even made a police report or a missing person report because he has not heard of her. He has not seen her. Like, she's disappeared and has never returned. Honestly, that scares me more because what if one day she comes back with her creepy ass smile? Can you imagine? Knock knock. Oh, I just scared myself. Anyway, what do you guys think? Because first of all, the first knock knock, if my husband woke up and said knock knock and I'm like, who's there? It's not me, don't open the door. Divorced, bitch! What the fuck?
What this woman did still leaves locals speechless 65 years later. In the small town of Goobersville, Indiana, in the year 1957, a chilling incident unfolded. Karen Noodleman, a 16-year-old girl with a haunting past, resided in an insane asylum. Known for causing the tragic loss of her family members, she was deemed dangerous after a lobotomy gone wrong when she was just 13. One eerie night, during the routine morning roll count, Karen was nowhere to be found in her cell. Panic ensued as the asylum doctors discovered a hidden hole behind her Marilyn Monroe poster. The entire facility went on high alert, and the police were immediately notified. Concern for the safety of Karen's remaining family members grew, particularly her younger brother, who was living with their grandparents. Multiple attempts to reach out to her grandparents went unanswered, deepening the sense of unease among the asylum staff and law enforcement. With a sense of urgency, the authorities rushed to Karen's grandparents' home. They pounded on the front door, yelling, "Police!" Uncertain of what they would find inside, someone finally opened the door, but it wasn't who they expected.
When I was a sophomore in high school, I was sitting next to my best friend Kayla in geometry. The teacher had finished the rest of the lesson and was giving us the rest of class time to get a head start on homework. Kayla was trying to explain to me a problem I didn't understand when all of a sudden we were interrupted by the intercom. There was an announcement that we were under an active lockdown and everyone needed to shelter in place immediately. We asked the teacher if she had been warned that we were going to have a drill, and she told us no. The teachers are always warned about lockdown drills, so this was when we realized this could actually be a serious thing. The teacher locked the door and turned off the lights. Then we began working together to push our heavy metal desks up against the door so that no one could get in. We then hid in a corner of the room. I was tucked underneath the teacher's desk along with a few other students. We were all quiet, checking our phones to see if we could figure out what was going on. I was looking through the news app when I saw that there was a crazy man believed to be on drugs that was involved in an assault right by our school. It was believed that he may have entered our school and was still on the loose. I shared this information with the class and we were all even more terrified. A few girls started to cry and some people were texting their parents to let them know what was going on. I had a sister who was a freshman who was also in the building and I texted her to see if she was okay and asked if she knew what was going on. 15 painful minutes went by before she texted me back. She said someone had been banging on her classroom door and screaming profanities for the last 10 minutes, but they had finally gone away. I decided to keep this information to myself, not wanting to freak my classmates out even more. But before long, I heard yelling in the distance and held my breath, hoping that whoever it was would just pass by the classroom. But before long, there was a sudden banging at the door, followed by a crazed laughter. The man began taunting us, telling us that he had a gun, and there was no point in hiding because he was going to get us. We were horrified, but did our best to stay quiet. Our teacher was on the phone with 911, giving them a whispered update of what was happening. Suddenly, there was a loud gunshot from the hallway, causing several of us to cry out loudly. The man outside laughed even harder. There were shouts from further down the hallway, and I understood to be police officers. They demanded the man drop his weapon. After several requests, they tased him, and I heard him screaming like crazy. Around 30 more minutes went by before we were finally told that the school had been cleared. The man had been taken into custody, and we were free to go.
This is one of the hardest execution videos to watch explained. The video that I'm about to explain is a short one, but it's absolutely gut-turning. The video setting is in some sort of rainforest area, and as the video begins, Deborah Bessa, who is the victim on your screen right now, can be seen kneeling on the ground, and a man is standing behind her holding her hair. His face is covered and he's holding a machete. The look on Deborah's face is complete fear and worry as she awaits her grisly demise. She is then pulled to the ground by the guy with the machete and lets out a haunting scream. Deborah is lying on her side, almost in a fetal position now, and the killer then takes the machete and tries to slash the side of her neck with it, but struggles as Deborah tries her best to defend herself, while letting out ear-piercing screams. A second man then enters the shot carrying what looks like a kitchen knife, and he then begins to stab Deborah in her side and around her ribcage area. She reacts with a short, sharp scream and then lies on her back after she is stabbed. The man with the machete then begins slashing at her throat as Deborah screams and screams and screams. And while this is happening, the man with the kitchen knife begins stabbing her in the stomach. And instinctively, she tries to move her hand to protect herself from the stabbings, but the killer stabs through her hand and into her stomach. After a few seconds, she stops screaming but is still moving as she is being stabbed and beheaded by the killers. The man with the machete then stands up and hits Deborah in the throat with the machete, which makes a cracking type sound, which means he most likely hit her spine with the blade. He then hits her again and again, and after the second strike, it appears Deborah vomits, but it comes out of her slashed throat instead of her mouth. He then hits her a couple more times and her body freezes up as her spinal cord is severed, and it appears the beheading has been completed and the video concludes. 2 of the 3 killers in this video have been arrested and this video was used as evidence. This video is absolutely horrific and some consider it one of the worst ones out there, and I could see why. Just the pure evil and brutality in this video is enough to make you look away. Never go searching for this video because you will regret it immediately.
Adam was showing us this little opening. It looks like an attic entrance in his duplex, but the attic or whatever entry thing is right over the stairwell where you cannot reach it. It's in the strangest spot. The only way to get in there is over the stairwell, which is like, what, 15 feet? So Adam says. I was ready to explain this away for a few reasons. One, it might just be some sort of insulated space that all residential buildings have. I'm not an architect, so what do I know? It didn't seem relevant enough at the time, so I decided I wasn't going to mention it here. But over the past week and a half, I've been hearing more things above me. A few days after the first sound, I heard a similar thump while I was in the kitchen. Then last night, I heard something small clink to the floor and roll about 6 feet before stopping. Something is going on up there. Maybe it's a raccoon, but maybe it's not. I also can't get over the fact that the hatch is in such a weird, inaccessible place over the stairs. I need to investigate. I'm just not sure right now. That does not make any sense. I'd barely fallen asleep when I woke up to an incredibly loud crash above me. It sounded like someone had dropped a bowling ball. I bolted upright in my bed, immediately felt strange. There was a weird energy all around me I can't explain. The crash happened again, probably 15 times in a row. Then I heard a smaller, creaky sound from the hallway. And in my mind, I registered it as footsteps, but it really could have been anything. I stayed still, but there were no more sounds after that. I lay back down, still tense and nervous, but I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up the next morning and everything seemed normal again. I got dressed and I left to go get a bagel, same as every Saturday. As I made my way downstairs, something crunched under my feet. I looked down and noticed a pile of debris on the stairs directly under the hatch. What? At that point, bagels were the last thing on my mind, and I went back upstairs, grabbed the pole, I set my camera on the coat wardrobe at the top of the stairs, and I hit record just to make sure it would be caught on video if a demon burst out the hatch. I picked it up and realized what it was. It was a small leather shoe. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm gonna cry, freak out, like, oh, you can't, oh my gosh, you can't make this up. How? Next night, the same thing happened, and I woke up suddenly feeling like I had missed seeing something, like a candle that had just gone out and you could still smell it. I thought about using the pet cam from the living room to monitor my bedroom while I slept, but the cord was too short to get the camera high enough to see the entire room, so I improvised. I downloaded an app that takes a photo every 60 seconds. And I set my phone at the top of the bookcase. This is almost 7 feet tall, so it had a pretty good view of my bed and the surround.
What is the most tragic announcement that was made at your high school? The most horrible form of announcement happened in class unintentionally. The teacher hadn't arrived yet, and everyone was seated but chatting. I heard a group to my left talking about a boy at a nearby school who had taken his own life the night before. A blonde boy, 2 years younger. They started talking about his sister, our age, and I remember the most horrible sensation, like a rising sickness, creeping all over me. They shared the gory details in hushed whispers, horrified, yet loving the gruesome darkness of it all. How he'd waited till he was alone, and done it in the garage. What he looked like, when they cut him down. I felt my heart, beating so hard that I felt sick, so sick I wanted to vomit on my desk, but I couldn't move. All I could do was listen. The girl in front of me suddenly turned around and I still remember her face, white as a ghost. She said my name, and then, no. Oh no. The group gossiping said my cousin's name just as the teacher entered. I felt like a ghost, suspended in that horrible second where I heard his name and I couldn't pretend. My mind didn't work. The girl in front of me kept turning to ask if I was okay, but I couldn't look at her. The teacher hated me, and I couldn't ask to leave, because I couldn't explain. For 40 minutes I sat there, and everyone's voices felt like they were in a wind tunnel. All I could really hear was my breathing, hard and fast. Dead, dead, dead. I was stuck. The moment class ended, I bolted, leaving books in my bag, walking straight to the office. There wasn't any air. It felt like I was crossing a desert. The school was deserted. Everyone was in class. It made the moment more surreal, like being inside a dream. My dad was home that day, and all I could think was that I needed to reach my dad. The world had shrunk to a single mission. Please ring my dad. I need to go home, I told the office staff through the window. They kept talking to me, but I couldn't understand their words. Please ring my dad. I need to go home, I said these words over and over. Finally, one asked if I was sick. I felt sick with the relief that I now had an excuse. Yes. I am sick. I went and sat in a chair, no longer able to stand. The office ladies asked how I was sick, and what was wrong, but I was unable to tell them. I was caught, unable to explain, but unable to leave. And in my mind, all the time, he was swinging. Luckily, at this point my year coordinator came running in.
This story is chilling not only because it features a brutal murder, but because of the extreme lengths that one of the alleged killers went to after the killing. On June 27th, 1977, at around 7 a.m., a nurse named Mildred Garva pulled up to the famous Glen Sheen mansion in Duluth, Minnesota. An elderly woman, Elizabeth Congdon, lived there. Elizabeth needed constant care, which is why our nurse Mildred is there. So Mildred stepped onto the grand staircase, but midway up, she sees another sign that something might not be right. The night nurse, Velma Piedila, was lying on a window seat on the landing. She notices that Velma was covered in blood, and there were injuries all over her body. It looked like someone had literally beaten her. It didn't take Mildred long to confirm that Velma, the fill-in night shift nurse, was dead. If someone had hurt Velma during the night, they probably had made it to Elizabeth too. The elderly woman was in her bed with a bloody pillow over her face. Okay. The intruder had obviously suffocated her. So from there, the homicide investigation is underway. Right away, the police determined that Elizabeth didn't really have any enemies. This left one other motive for the people to consider, and that is obviously money. Elizabeth was the daughter of a wealthy miner. So she actually inherited this entire fortune. She was said to be worth about $8 million. Okay, so $8 million, 1970s, retired, elderly woman. Police are like, okay, the jewelry box has obviously been raided, and so they're thinking this is a robbery gone wrong. Someone came in, killed the night nurse, and killed her and stole some money.
All right, so we're just gonna go away in the car now. Everything's all right. Just go to sleep like normally, okay?
Okay.
Okay, let's go.
Dude, what's up with her?
Okay, so we just got back to the car. We set up all of the cameras. We have one downstairs, one in the hallway, one in the spare bedroom, and one in Taylor's room.
Dude, I just can't believe how big and creepy your house is. Do you think we have enough cameras in there?
Yeah, I hope so. Let's just relax down and watch, okay?
Okay. Wait, go back to that camera.
What?
Do you see that? That door's opening. Bro, what the hell is that?
I don't know, dude. I think Taylor was right.
What's wrong with that guy's face?
Bro, can you put...
Around 10 minutes in, Samson was dislodged from his seat. Passengers, friends and family watched in horror as Samson hung on. Heartbreaking, Samson's last words were, "Tell my mum and dad I love them," before he fell out of his seat and plummeted to the ground. On the video, other passengers are heard screaming, demanding that they stop the ride. Samson was now on the ground surrounded by a pool of blood. He fell 200 feet. Terrified onlookers called emergency services.
Alright, tell me exactly what happened.
The thing went down to drop, and when they got closer to the bottom, when it hit the brakes, the guy fell right out of the seat and bam, straight through the chair and just flopped. It was the biggest smack I ever heard in my life.
Okay. Alright, so we have help on...
I seen him hit the ground.
Okay, so he fell out of the thing onto the floor?
Yeah.
Okay, are you with him now?
No, there's a whole crowd around him right now.
Okay. And was he the only one that fell
Yeah, he's
out?
the only one that fell, but there was 4 people on the ride.
Okay. Alright, so we have help on the way. It looks like we're getting multiple calls.
Yeah, no one's calling right now. Everyone's just standing around looking at the fucking guy, you know?
Okay. Yeah, we have 2 other people that called in, and we're on the way there, okay? We're coming as fast as we can.
The emergency services arrived on the scene, but unfortunately it was too late.
So this guy, he's a liar, but his lies are about to make him rich. Let's call him Francis. And Francis is 16, he's from New York, and he can't stay out of trouble. He's always lying and stealing from his parents and stealing from local businesses. But then one day, he commits forgery. And he gets arrested. Here's his mugshot. And after he's bailed out, Francis goes on another crime spree and he eventually steals a car and flees to California. And then a few weeks later, he's arrested there. And they send him back to New York where he has a bunch of outstanding warrants. And then, back in New York, Francis uses a bunch of forged checks to purchase an airline pilot's uniform. Because he thinks if he dresses like a pilot, which is a well-respected job, businesses will be more likely to trust him and cash his fake checks. But this plan doesn't really work. Because he gets arrested for trying to use stolen checks. And he spends the next 2 years in prison. And by the time he gets out, he's 19. And a month later, he's arrested again in Boston for trying to steal a car and writing more bad checks. So they send him back to prison for another year. He's 20 now. So he eventually gets out and continues to be a turd. He gets that old pilot's uniform he bought and he uses it to scam a few free flights from the airlines. Because I guess off-duty pilots get free flights. But then he gets arrested in Baton Rouge for stealing a bunch of checks from a family who was trying to help him. And from there, he eventually flees to Europe. And there, he's right back to stealing cars and cashing fake checks in France and Sweden. And then he gets arrested in France and he's deported back to the US. He's 22 now. And now that he's back in the US, surprise, surprise, he goes right back to dressing up as a pilot and cashing more forged checks. 4 months later, he's caught and arrested again. And while he's in jail, he escapes. But within a few days, they catch him again trying to cash yet another forged check. And this time, he's sentenced to 12 years in prison. But a few years later, he gets out on parole. Then he's arrested again, this time for stealing art supplies and cameras from a children's summer camp. Here's his mugshot. And so at this point, Francis is around 26. And around this time, he moves into his parole officer's garage so his parole officer can keep an eye on him. And it's here that it finally seems like he's starting to learn his lesson. Until Francis is around 27 at this point, and he decides to start his own anti-fraud consulting company. And he starts holding these crime prevention seminars where he gives speeches. So he gives these speeches and he tells everyone he's a reformed criminal. But he doesn't just tell people about all the check fraud and stealing from people and dressing up as a pilot to get free flights. No. Instead, he starts making up these fantastical stories about how from the age of 16 to 20, he had snuck into a hospital and had pretended to be a pediatrician for an entire year, and how he had pretended to be a lawyer for another whole year, and how he faked being a sociology professor at BYU for a few semesters, and that he stole $2.5 million from the airlines, and that the FBI had been chasing after him for years and he made some kind of daring escape through an airline toilet. And all of these stories are bullshit. I mean, these aren't just small embellishments. These are things that he completely makes up. And we know this because during the age when he supposedly did all this stuff, he was locked up in prison. All of which is public record. The only thing he really did was write a bunch of bad checks, rip off a few of his friends, and scam a handful of free flights. But none of that ends up mattering, because when Francis tells these fantastical stories about how he faked being a pediatrician for a year, or a lawyer, or whatever, people are fascinated. They love hearing him say this stuff. And eventually, Francis's bullshit stories become so popular, he gets invited to do a guest appearance on a game show where he repeats these lies.
I worked there for a year as chief resident of a hospital.
And people watching just eat it up. They love him. After that, he gets invited onto the Today Show. Then he gets invited onto the Johnny Carson Show several times, where, again, he repeats these lies.
How did you pass yourself as a pediatrician?
I supervised 7 interns on the midnight to 8 shift.
And these appearances on Johnny Carson really blow him up. Suddenly, he's getting all kinds of media attention. People want to know more about him. So he teams up with an author and writes an autobiography. But not about his actual life, about these fake stories he made up. So then 2 years later, his book of made-up stories about his life gets published. And you've heard of it. It's called Catch Me If You Can. And it quickly becomes a New York Times bestseller. And then Francis sells the movie rights. And 17 years later, the rights end up at DreamWorks. And they make a movie directed by Steven Spielberg and starring Tom Hanks and Leonardo DiCaprio. And the movie goes on to be a huge hit. And years after that, they adapt it into a Broadway musical. And this whole time, even after the success of the book and the movie, Francis is out there doing guest appearances and giving public speeches, telling these same made-up stories about his life to huge crowds.
I spent about a year practicing law. In both the job as the lawyer and the doctor, no one ever doubted for a second I was not.
And it wasn't until more recently, in the age of the internet, that journalists really start to dig in and fact-check him in a real way. And they track his whole life through interviews and public records, and they realize Francis isn't some brilliant impersonator. He's just a pathological liar. And to this day, he's still running his anti-fraud company, and he's still out there giving speeches. Shout out to Hollywood.
This is the case of the real-life jigsaw killer, where in 2009, body parts were being found all around England. Since it's October, you guys have been asking me to cover the most horrific, terrifying true crime cases out there, so be careful what you guys ask for. I've got a long list ready. On the morning of March 22nd, 2009, a farmer found a mysterious duffel bag just abandoned on his property. Inside the bag was something wrapped in plastic and duct tape that the farmer described as being large and squishy. The authorities were quickly called to the grisly discovery. Inside of the bag was the left leg of a human being. And then 1 week later, about a 35-minute drive from the first discovery, a second gruesome discovery was found. A forearm, elbow to wrist was just found on the side of the road. And then 2 days later, another discovery was found. This was about 100 miles away. And this is so terrifying. It was a head, but the head was missing its ears, the eyes were removed, the nose was removed, the mouth was removed, pretty much all identifying features. The only thing left was the person's teeth. And at this point, the fact that there's been body parts just being found all across England is a huge media story. Literally everyone is talking about this. There's mass panic for everyone throughout the UK. They are living a real life horror movie. And this is really horrific and wrong and really gonna piss a lot of you guys off, but at this point the media starts referring to the victim as Jigsaw Man because he was missing so many pieces. And about a week later, the right leg was found about a mile away from where the left leg was found, and this leg was also wrapped in plastic and duct tape. And then 4 days after that, a suitcase was found abandoned in a ditch. And just imagine the fear of walking your dog and finding this after weeks of people finding body parts in bags, and then you just see a suitcase abandoned in a ditch. And what really gets me is that everyone just keeps opening these bags that they're finding, even though it's been spread all across the media that people are finding body parts in bags. Could not have been me. If I found a suitcase in a ditch and people have been finding body parts all across the country, would not have opened the bag. But the man that was just walking his dog and found the suitcase did open the bag. Inside the bag was a torso and also another arm. They were able to determine that the victim had died by being stabbed to death. They also could determine that all of the body parts that had been found belonged to the same victim and that the victim was male, but they were unable to identify the victim because his DNA was not in the system. It's been 3 weeks of people finding body parts throughout the entire country. There's mass panic and investigators have zero leads. They have no answers for anyone. They can't even identify the victim, even though at this point they pretty much have an entire body. They have no choice but to beg the public for help. Does anyone know of a man in their life, a loved one that has been missing for about a month? They end up getting a lot of leads of people thinking that maybe their loved one could be this potential victim, this Jigsaw Man. But none of the leads were really panning out. Either the height would be wrong, the person would have identifying tattoos or different identifying markings, the race would be wrong, how long the person had been missing didn't really line up. Until they got a call from a mother whose son had mysteriously disappeared about a month ago, and that man was named Jeffrey Howe. See, Jeffrey was the kind of guy with a heart of gold who was constantly keeping in touch with his friends and family. So when he just randomly went MIA for a month, people were really concerned. So investigators went to Jeffrey's house to see if maybe he's there, if there's any leads. While Jeffrey was not there, there were 2 people living in his house. Inside of the home was a 38-year-old man named Stephen Marshall and his 21-year-old girlfriend. Stephen introduced himself as a co-worker of Jeffrey's, and he said that he had been down on his luck, so Jeffrey allowed him to live with him rent-free until he got back on his feet. Stephen and his girlfriend also did not seem concerned at all that their roommate had been missing for a month. They never reported him missing, tried to find out where he was, and they also said that they had no idea where he could possibly be. Stephen and Sarah were both brought in for questioning, and both of them were being seriously uncooperative. They weren't asking any questions, but that was fine because investigators really wanted to get them out of the house so they could search Jeffrey's house. Investigators said that the house was suspiciously clean, but there wasn't really any other evidence, so they actually started to rip up the carpet, which I'm not even sure is something that you can do without probable cause, but it was a good thing that they did it because they ended up finding large amount of bloodstains in the bathroom and in the bedroom. It was clear that a murder had taken place here by the sheer amount of blood that they were able to find under the carpet, but they still needed to identify Jeffrey as their dismembered victim, which they luckily were able to do with his dental records. But they also needed to prove that Jeffrey's roommates, Stephen and Sarah, were the ones that committed this murder because these were their prime suspects at this point. So apparently there were green fibers that were stuck in the duct tape that had been wrapped around some of the body parts. So inside of Jeffrey's home, they start just taking anything that's green and made of fabric so they can test it with these green fibers, and they did get a match on a shirt that belonged to Stephen. So it wasn't looking good. So Stephen and Sarah were both arrested, and then they needed to find a motive, and they quickly found one, which was money. In the days after killing Jeffrey Howe, Stephen and Sarah sold a lot of his belongings and also were charging things on his credit cards. So through the money that they got from selling his belongings and also the charges on his credit card, Stephen and Sarah stole about $5,000 from Jeffrey. This is a man that let them live with him rent-free and he lost his life for $5,000. That was all Jeffrey Howe was worth to these two evil people. And Stephen and Sarah, who were boyfriend and girlfriend before this, tried to turn on each other, blame the other one, said that the other one killed Jeffrey, but eventually they both did plead guilty for their roles in this crime. Before their sentencing, both Stephen and Sarah were given an opportunity to address the court, speak to the judge. Most people use this opportunity to apologize, show remorse, even blame their actions on their terrible childhood, but that's not what Stephen does. Stephen just gets up and says, "This is not the first time I've done this before." I'm assuming that he just wanted to clear his conscience or something, because he just gets up and admits to the court that he had previously worked for a gang, and his job in the gang was to dismember and dispose of the gang's victims. Stephen was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 36 years, and Sarah was sentenced to 3 years and 9 months, so she is out right now living as a free woman. If you watched the end of this video, thank you so much. Please let me know what terrifying true crime case you want to hear for the month of October. I already have a long list, but I'm always looking for recommendations. Please let me know your thoughts on this jigsaw killer case, and I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys tomorrow with another terrifying October themed case.